Good afternoon. I'm Greg Whitmore, the Consortium Cataloger for the Missouri Evergreen Consortium. And this, in the last video of the advanced class, I'm going to show you how to original catalog a single book from beginning to end. There will be occasions to do this because we'll find materials that come in, especially self-published books or self-recorded CDs perhaps, or local cookbooks that aren't going to have a whole lot of publishing information out there in OCLC or the Library of Congress or WorldCat or anything like that. So we need to do it ourselves. But it's also about due diligence. We want to make sure that we look through all of our resources and make sure we find what we're looking for if it's out there. We don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel if we can avoid it. So I'm going to go ahead and start a Missouri Evergreen. I have an ISBN here for the book that I want to do. I'm going to go into the search the catalog. I'm going to do a numeric search for an ISBN, and I'm just going to paste it right in here. And we can see that there were no items found. In addition to that, I also want to do a title search just to make sure that there isn't another record out there somewhere. So I'm going to come back into key search, keyword search. I'm going to pull up all books by title. I'm going to paste the title in here, which is The Golden Age Black Cat, and I'm going to hit search. Now we did have a title that showed up, but it's obviously not the same one that I'm looking for. So I'm not quite satisfied yet that this particular record for this particular book exists. So I'm going to now check WorldCat. In WorldCat, I'm going to go into books, and I'm just going to type in the title again, or in this case, cut and paste, which can be your best friend if you use it right. And again, a number of things have popped up, a number of resources, but not necessarily the one I'm looking for. Okay. If you were actually in here doing this for real, you'd probably want to go through all 99 print books just to make sure. I've already done that, and I can tell you it does not exist. If we want to verify it, rather than doing the title search, we'll go ahead and look for the ISBN again. And something showed up, but it's an internet resource, and again, it's not exactly what I'm looking for. If you're in WorldCat and you really want to just limit to ISBN, you can type in the code BN with a colon before the actual ISBN, and that'll prove to you that there's no such animal in this particular database. Now I'm going to go into the Library of Congress, and I'm going to actually do the exact same thing. I'll search for the ISBN first since I already have it here. I want to change this particular field so that I'm either looking at the Library of Congress control number, the ISBN, or the International Standard Serial Number, which is what we use for magazines and journals and things like that. So there's nothing in here on the ISBN, and as part of our due diligence, I'm going to go through and check the title. Knowing, of course, that nothing's going to show up. Well, we did have some things that showed up. And looking through these really quick, I do not see anything of what I'm looking for. So, I'm considering this to be really all good, but how do you know, I hear you cry, that this book really exists aside from the fact that I'm holding it in my hand, which you can't see? If I copy the ISBN again and I go into Amazon, which I use quite frequently to find information, you can see that this is the book that I'm talking about right here. So, we know that the book exists. We have some information on it based on what's in the book itself. There's a little bit of publication information, and obviously in Amazon we can pick up some more information, but what we need to do now is actually go into Missouri Evergreen, and we are going to hand catalog this from beginning to end. And I'll show you how we do that. The very first thing we do is come into the catalog search, or the catalog again. Going under the cataloging tab, we are going to create a new MARC record. Under creating a new MARC record, we actually have a series of templates that we can use to kind of give us a skeleton of the item that we're doing. You can pull one in for audiobooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of things here. In this case, we're just going to pull in the tags for a book. I'm going to load it. These are just some very generic tags that every book should have at bare minimum. To be honest, this really isn't going to work for me because I want to have all kinds of information in here. But this is a good place to at least start. From this point, I'm just going to go ahead and hit save, and that's going to generate the TCN number, which is what I want. From here, I'm going to go into MARC Edit. And normally, I do all of my editing in the flat text editor. Notice that we actually have two options here. I'm used to doing it in flat text, and I think that way a lot. But Missouri Evergreen is really kind of neat because they have what's called an enhanced MARC editor. And what this does will actually put in information for you based on what either you input or what's previously there that it'll add. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So I did kind of cheat a little bit. I went through and I cataloged this particular book before this video because I didn't want it to take forever. But I'll show you how to go out and fill out these fields so that you have a better idea of it. So let's start with type. If we put our mouse in there and we right mouse click, this is where you can actually get a list of whatever type this particular resource is. It could be manuscripts, it could be music, it could be mixed materials, it could be a kit. There's all kinds of options that are here. Of course, in this case, it's a book. The E level is something that you can fill in that's an encoding level. If you don't have any information for this particular field, you leave it blank. The source, which is the next field over, identifies where this cataloging record is coming from. Typically, if we're downloading books, it'll be OCLC, maybe Minerva. Basically, it's either going to be a national bibliography agent or a cooperative cataloging program, neither of which applies here. In our case, because it's brand new, it's going to be other. The audience in the next field identifies who this book is written for. Is it for adults? Is it for children? Is it young adult? Again, if we right mouse click into it, we have all of our options available. As far as I'm concerned, this is a general book. It's not written for any particular reading level or anything. The next field over is what we call the control. This describes the kind of archival level of this particular resource. The default is blank, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Coming over into language, we need to identify what kind of language is going to go in here. This book is written in English, so we right mouse click and we scroll down. And we can click on it, and you notice that 3-digit code goes in there. All right, now we're going to go back to the next line. BLVL stands for bibliographic level. Again, if we right mouse click, we can see that this could be part of any one of these. Again, you want to pick the one that best suits what you are doing. In this case, because it's a collection, I'm going to go ahead and hit C. Coming over into form, this describes the resource's form. Multiple formats are listed in here, so we need to decide, is it a microfilm? Is it large print? Is it Braille? In this case, it's really just going to be regular print production. Over here into the next tab, this is actually for a conference publication. So if this publication that we're cataloging came out of a conference, this is where you would want to put that code. In this particular case, it did not come out of a conference, so I'm going to skip it. The next field over is biography. Is this a biography? And if so, we need to put some information together. Like these other fields that I don't have any information for, if it's not used, the default is going to be blank. So that's where we're going to leave it. MREC stands for Modified Record. This is again where we're going to actually go in and put some information if we're modifying this particular record for whatever reason. The default is blank, and I think we should just leave it there because this is brand new. We're really not modifying anything at all. The last field in this particular line is country, so we need to identify the country that this came out of. Now I know it was printed in California, so according to the inside book cover, so if I scroll through the list, I can see California right here, which is what I'm going to click on. The U at the very end of the California is for the United States. Going back, let's look at the third line. This particular field talks about the nature of contents. It's a description of certain types of materials. If we right mouse click into it, we can see that again we have all kinds of options that are available to us. Oops. In this case, it's going to be comics or graphic novels because that's what it is. The next field over, GPub, actually identifies whether this particular resource is a government publication. There is some information you can put in there. If there's not, the default is leave it blank. So that's what I recommend. The LitF field talks about the type of literary form this particular resource has. And again, if I right mouse click in it, it's going to show us all kinds of options that are available. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just call it comic strips. Comic strips, comics, graphic novels, to me, they all kind of mean the same thing. You're talking about a two-dimensional sequential artwork that tells a story. Okay. The index field here identifies whether this particular work has an index or not. The default on this is blank, and this particular resource that I have is not does not have a resource. So I'm going to leave it blank, just like it shows. Now we're going to go back and do the last fourth line. DESC stands for the descriptive cataloging form. This defines whether the object has been cataloged according to the provisions of the International Standard Bibliographic Description, ISDB. We will always catalog to those specifications. So we're going to put an I in here. Ah, it's not taking it. Strange. Well, I'm going to skip it. Over into illustrations. We might mouse click here and we can decide whether we have illustrations in this particular record or not. And of course, with this particular book, we do. The FEST field stands for Festschrift, which is a German term that's defined as a complimentary or memorial publication, usually in the form of a collection of essays, addresses, or other contributions. The default is blank, so once again, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. We come over here to DTST. This stands for the type of date and the publication status. We use this one to categorize the type of dates in association with a resource. Either the publication date, maybe the copyright date, maybe both. Again, if we right mouse click, we have multiple things we can look at. In this case, the publication date and the copyright date are the same, so I'm going to leave it as a T. And finally, in the last record, I'm going to put in, or the last field is the date. This is usually going to be the date that it was published, or again, the date that it was copyrighted. The only date I have is 2017. Once that's all done, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. So this is starting to fill out my record quite nicely. From here, I'm going to start adding tags, and I'm going to start adding information in here as needed to fill this record out. The very first thing I want to do is add my 020 ISBN tags. Which are right there. If this had been an OCLC or we had found some information in there, the 010 we could put in as well, which is the OCLC tag. The next thing that I'm going to add are the 040 tag and the 0490, or the 049 tag. Now the 040 is already here, so actually all I'm going to do is just modify it really quick. $D, and my particular library code is going to go on the end of it. Once I get that in, I can go ahead and put in the 049 tag. 049 basically says that this particular record was created or imported by me. Remember that the 049 tag is 4 characters long, so in addition to your 3-letter library code, you're also going to need an A to go over to take the place of the last character. Because I want people to be able to put this in a Dewey system, I'm also going to include a Dewey number. To do that, I actually went to the OCLC Classify site and I looked up comic strips. And the one code that came up most often for comic strips was this one. 741.5942. Okay. There is no author on this particular book. There's an editor, Lance Jones, but he is not the author. You never put an editor's name in here as the author. It's not correct. So I'm going to go ahead and just eliminate that tag altogether. Now in the 245 tag, I can give Mr. Jones the credit he deserves in addition to the title and the volume of this. I'll show you what I mean as soon as I paste this in here. So we can see the 245 tag. We can see that we have a 4 at the very end of our second delimiter. That tells us that the first word of the title we're going to skip. Anytime it's the or an or a, we can put in the number here to tell the system how many letters and spaces to skip before it actually starts searching. In this case, we want it to skip 4 spaces because the word the is 3 spaces, and then we have a space here. That's 4 altogether. So we have the Golden Age Black Cat as the title. We have the volume included here and the actual number, and then we also see that it was compiled by Lance Jones. That's where we're going to use his name. In addition to that, we'll put his name later on in the record. Okay. Following that, I'm actually going to put in an alternate title. In talking about the history of comic books, there are a number of characters named Black Cat. This particular Black Cat is actually the original one. And sometimes people will search that, thinking that they're finding the right thing. So I'm going to go ahead and put in original Black Cat. If you type in one and the other, you'll get the same result. The other reason you would use a 246 title is to take the place of words like and. I think I used the example 101 Dalmatians, which is a series of numbers and the word and in the original title. But as an alternative title, you could spell all that out in case that's how your patrons might look for something. You just have to think in the way that your patrons might be searching for this. Once I'm done with the 246, I'm actually going to add a 257 tag, which basically tells us what country it was printed in, and a 264 tag, which tells us which state, who published it, and what year it was done. And that's going to look like this. Okay. Now we're going to go into the 300 tags. The very first 300 tag is going to be some more information about the actual resource itself. How many pages is it? How big is it? Does it have illustrations? Does it have color? We want to look at all those things. So I'm going to just right mouse click my information into there. Notice too that I've got a space now in between my 264 and my 300 tag. We do not want any of those spaces. So make sure that they're always closed up. The other thing to let you know is that while you're building this, you can see that it's taking a little bit of time, and if you had to type all this information, it may take even longer than that. Missouri Evergreen will time out on you at some point while you're working in the system. I think it's somewhere around, at least for me, it's been about 4 hours. And if you haven't saved any of your information inside of that time frame and the time frame comes up, the system will kick you out and you'll have to start over again. So just like anything else, I heartily recommend that as you're going through and building this original record, you periodically save your changes. Okay, so we're not quite done with the 300s. We do have the 336, 337, and 338 there. These are all RDA tags that typically talk about the type of medium that this resource is, especially if it's like a CD or a movie of some kind, or something that actually is content, what kind of media it is, and what kind of carrier you need to view it or to listen to it. In the case of books, none of that is applicable. We still have to include the codes though, and this is how those particular codes would be formatted, just like you see there. Alright, now we're into the 500 series of tags. This is where a lot of general information about this resource is going to go in. That's not necessarily covered by any of the other tags. You can put a wealth of really good information in here. So, the very first tag, 500 tag I can put in, these are repeatable too, by the way. In fact, if you look at this record and you see like the 020, that's also repeatable. So if you have multiple ISBNs, you can include them. 500s are very repeatable. The very first one that I'm going to do is tell the patron where these comics were originally published, under what publisher, and when they were published, which is somewhat important to the resource itself. For this particular book, these scans do not come from somebody's collection. They are what we consider to be in the public domain. And there are a couple of websites that will actually delineate that information. So the original scans from this book came from a site called Comic Book Plus and the Digital Comic Museum, both of which are free online. The publishing and story information came from the Grand Comics database website, which is also free and online. Okay. For my next 500 tag, I sound like a magician. I'm going to include a little bit more historical data. And that would be the fact that this particular character showed up 4 months before Wonder Woman was introduced into comic books, which I think is significant. And finally, for the last 500 tag that I have, just the 500 itself, I'm going to talk about the artists that actually drew the stories in this book. So typically, when we're talking about comics, we can determine an artist's style by either their signature, which makes it really easy, or by the style of art that they produce. Most of the time in the golden age of comics, which usually runs from about 1938 to about 1954, none of the artists and writers none of the people that create the comics are credited at all. And that's how we determine who does what. In this particular case, also, none of the writers have been credited in this story, although we did figure out who the artists were just by looking at their art styles. The next set of tags that I have are actually reference tags. Since I know where these scans came from, I'm going to include the websites that they were generated from and the information where they were generated from, so that if people were actually interested in going and looking at those, they could find them. As you know, I am a stickler for a 520 tag, so I'm going to include one of those as well. It's a little lengthy, but you get the idea once you're at the very end of it. All right, the 600 series of tags is going to talk to us about subject headings and genre headings and format headings. We try to include as many of these as possible because everything that we include in this record is searchable by the patron on the computer. And this is one of those cases where more is really much better. So in this case, I have about 5 of these that I'm going to include. So I've included the fact that Black Cat is a fictitious character and the comic book strips and stories. There are, this is another subject heading that people can look at, and this is typically where her books lie in. They're more detective mystery than they are really superhero, although she is considered a superhero because of the costume and the mask and everything. So we're doing well. I'm going to go ahead and save some changes to make sure I don't lose anything at this point. And I'm going to kind of look over everything and make sure that it all looks good so far, which it does. The next series of tags that I'm going to include are all the artists that actually drew these. I can get this information by looking at the artwork, determining who the artist was, verifying it on a couple of websites that maintain that information, and then looking up the names of the artists, of their birth date and death date according to the Library of Congress authority headings. So I've included the editor and the compilation person, if you want to call him that, and then the original 5 artists that are responsible for these materials. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to include, once again, the URL information that I included in the 500 tags, but this time they're going to be in the 856 tags. This will help people get to those particular websites should they want to go and investigate them. Generally, I'm going to look everything over, make sure that it says what I want it to say, and when it's done, I'm going to hit Save Changes. So you can see what my original MARC record looked like. Originally, when we started, we only had about, I don't know, maybe 10 tags that were out there, and now we've got quite a few. And if we go over and look at the patron view, this is what they're going to see. Okay, we're not quite done yet. Once the actual MARC information is in there, the next thing we'd want to do is go in and add holdings to a particular library. But in terms of actually developing the MARC record from beginning to end, this is what your final product would look like. I think I have to warn you at this point. Obviously, as you can see, the more information I put in, the longer it's going to take to develop this record. Generally, as a rule of thumb, if I have to original catalog something because I know I'm a little bit OCD about it, I set aside at least an hour to get it all done, to put all the typing in, to make sure all the codes are configured right, to make sure everything is as precise and has as much good information in it as I can. Sometimes we're going to come across materials like maybe a board book that doesn't have this much material in it. But as a cataloger, it's your responsibility and your creativity that's going to decide how good and how in-depth these records truly are. And the more in-depth they are, the better they're going to be for everybody else to use. So that brings us to the end of the advanced course. It has been a pleasure going through these videos and creating them for you. If you have any questions or any concerns or anything, you can always email me at gbwhitmore@msn.com. Thank you very much and have a good day.